What's happening, guys? Will Robinson here from Robinson's Auto, toolsandtime.com. Welcome back. Got a little disheartening news on that Ford Taurus you just seen behind me. Had some major issues. Had a blown intake gasket. Water got into the oil. They ran it for a while. Needless to say, it did some damage, so I had to do some major extensive repairs on that motor, and I made a lot of videos with a lot of footage covering that, and it all got corrupted, man. And I took a lot of extra time putting that one together for you guys. So we're going to take it for what it is and move forward. I'm not going to let it get me down too much. Okay, in the shop I got a 99 Suburban, same one we did the thermostat on. Like I mentioned, we had some other repairs to do to it. Right now I'm getting ready to do the rear brake shoes, and it had some leaky wheel cylinders. That's the main reason why we're doing it. So I got one side done. Let me give you a shot of the other. Got it jacked up, jack stands. We're ready to go. Okay, as you can see, I already got the wheels off it. So now it's time we can take and remove the drum. A lot of times these are frozen on, like you've seen in previous videos. You just take a BFH and you take and whack it. Put a decent sized hammer there and she'll come loose. But this one's already loose, so sometimes there'd be a ledge on the inner part of that drum from the brake shoes wearing into the drum, so you get a lip, and sometimes they tend to get stuck, so it might take a little finagling. Sometimes you have to take a little slack out of the brake shoes, but a lot of times you can get them off just by wiggling it. Try not to breathe in that dust. It's not a bad idea once you get it this far apart to clean it down with some brake cleaner. Maybe even wear a dust mask while you're doing this job. It's not good for you. And just like you see me do in the last video, when you jack it up, this one's rear wheel drive, so all the safety's out of the equation even though it's in park. Chuck the front wheels, put a block underneath the front wheels, because there is a chance it could roll forward while you're jacking. So as you can see, the brake shoes aren't that bad, but the other side had a real bad leaky wheel cylinder, so I'm just going to replace both sides. Okay, now that I got that off, I'm just going to take and spray it down with some brake cleaner. I'm not sure how you guys do it or where you buy your brake cleaner, but if you buy it by the case, it's a lot cheaper. Like Napa, they usually run sales on their brake cleaner, and you most times pick up a case for like 20 bucks, and it's a lot cheaper than buying individual cans, especially if you go through a lot of it like I do. And if you don't, it still lasts, you know, it has pretty good shelf life on it. We're going to replace the brake shoes. Even though they're not that bad, they got contaminated with brake fluid on the other side, so if you're going to do one side, you do them both, you know. So we'll let that evaporate a little bit and we'll start yanking. Another little tip, only pull one side apart at a time. It's good to have both wheels off, both drums off, so if you're doing one side, you can go to the other side while you're putting it back together. If you forget how a certain spring goes or a component, you can simply just go to the other side, and it's a mirror image, so you just use that as a reference. So it works pretty well. So do one side at a time. Alright, before we start taking it apart, we'll take a look at some components. As you can see, you got your basic springs. That's your wheel cylinder there. You'll probably find that once we pull the boots off, this one most likely is leaking as well. The other side was leaking real bad. You got your self-adjuster mechanism. That's your slack adjuster. Right there, we'll take that apart and we'll check it, make sure it's free. And then you also have your emergency brake lever. It's in the back that your cable hooks up to. And a couple retaining springs. Taking this apart, there's really no right or wrong way. I guess there could be wrong ways, but it's putting it back together that matters the most. So we'll just start popping some springs off. I got a couple specialty tools that I use for the job. However, if you don't have them, you can use a pair of cutting pliers. Like I'll demonstrate on With this tool here for removing these retaining springs, as you can see, there's a notch, and when you turn it to the opening, and it comes out. As you can see how that setup works there. But if you don't have this tool, you can simply use a pair of cutting pliers. It works just as well. Sometimes I do whole brake jobs with just cutting pliers because you can see what you're doing a little better. Okay, now you have those removed. Take and pop off some springs. Now that's another specialty tool. However, you could do this with a pair of side cutters as well. But this tool has this offset on it. They simply just put it around, turn it, pop it off. Works pretty well. I'll demonstrate this side using a pair of cutting pliers. I usually, when I set stuff down, I put it on the same side on the floor as I take it apart. That way it makes it a little easier. Instead of it all being in one pile, each side is separated. So all the springs that came off of this shoe, I put on the right side. Everything that came off the left side, I put on the left side. So as you can see, we're starting to get somewhere now. So take a move a little further. I'm just going to pop this off. Pop it out like that. Move this whole mechanism. As you see, this little spring came out from behind. This is your self-adjuster mechanism. So when you apply the brakes, this actually pushes down and turns this little star, which adjusts your brakes. So it's called a self-adjuster, automatic adjuster. We got this little plate here. Take that off. Okay, as you can see, we have one more spring right here. And that's where these tools come in handy. It's relatively cheap, and it has pretty much everything you need as in one assembly for doing these rear brake shoes. But as you can see, you could hook that spring like so. And usually on the brake shoes, there's a spot where there's a rivet, as long as they're not bonded pads. And I usually just try to grab it in there if I can. I'll show you where that came from real quick. That's from this crossbar for the emergency brake. We can take and remove that. But this spring was on here like so. Okay. In all reality, you really don't need to pop that one off. But instead of fighting with that one, a lot of times I'll just take and I'll remove the pad like so and just let it pop apart. As you can see, that self-adjuster mechanism came out. We'll take and we'll clean this up real good. As you can see, that's how it works. I'll explain more once we put it back together, but it's relatively a simple design. These pieces come out of the wheel cylinder. We'll need to reuse them on a new one. As you can see, you got these pins that come through the back plate. They for those retaining springs for the brake shoes. Sometimes you just want to inspect them as well. If any of these are rusted through, just get yourself a spring kit. However, these are in good shape. So, okay. The last thing remaining on this brake shoe, you could take and remove the spring off the bottom. I just leave it in place for now. We got this little C-clip. Let's see if we can get that to pop out. There it goes. And this just comes out of the emergency brake lever. As you can see, if you come back here, you got your brake line. Then you got the two retaining bolts. You got one here and one here. I'm going to take and loosen that brake line first, and then remove these two retaining bolts. You should use a line wrench on this, guys. It's a 9/16, maybe a 14 millimeter. However, it's on such an angle I just use an open end wrench, but if you feel like it's starting to slip, stop and get a line wrench. A line wrench is simply a little more beefier, but a lot more contact surface with a notch just to be able to get the brake line through. So that's what that is. I got this one broke loose, so we're good. Another thing, when you're breaking that line loose, make sure it's not twisting the line, because sometimes the line will rust itself fast inside that nut, and then you'll just take and twist it off, and then you'll be replacing the brake line as well. On some makes and models, you could break it loose, pull it out, and the wheel cylinder has just enough room where you could turn it and remove it that way, and then spin it on and lock it and get away with not turning that nut. On this one, I'm not sure if I have enough room. However, it's coming loose, so we don't have to worry about that. Okay. Those two retaining bolts are a 1/2 inch. 13 millimeter will probably fit as well. I got a little drain pan underneath it because the brake fluid is going to start dripping. That's another thing you got to keep in mind, guys. We're going to have to bleed the brakes when we're done. You'll find that these are most times frozen into that back plate. Okay. On these wheel cylinders, take and inspect the inside of these boots, and a lot of times you'll find that they're leaking. The other side was all contaminated. It was actually leaking out of the back of the drum. That's how bad it's leaking. But if I remove that boot there, you'll probably find that they're wet. Alright, so before I go any further, guys, I'm just going to take and clean this down. Move that brake line out of the way so I don't want to contaminate it. One more time. Another inspection point before you go too much further is you'll see these contact points for the back of the brake shoes. You're going to want to make sure that wore through the back. A lot of times if they're notched down, I think on the last service I filled these in with weld, but a lot of times you'll find that there's grooves in there. I usually just take my welder, fill them in, grind them smooth, and then you're just like new again. However, they do sell new backing plates, but you'll be fine if you fill them in with some weld, as long as you grind them down nice and smooth. Okay, and here's another thing, guys. This is a good customer of mine, and as you can see, previously when I did this I used Never Sees, and as you can tell it's still in there and it's still in good shape. So just goes to show you it does work well. Got the new wheel cylinder. Take and remove that plug when you're ready for it. As you can see, what I'll do before I put it in there and bolt it up, I'll get the brake line started and almost screwed all the way in, because a lot of times it's a rigid line. So now that it's free, it's not bolted in, you can screw it in a lot freer. If I go bolting it up, it might be a little cocked sideways or not perfectly straight. So get it started, get it mostly in, maybe even run it down finger tight prior to starting your bolts. Just going to apply a little Never Sees to the bolts. These are the heavy duty wheel cylinders. They had two options. I don't remember the part number off the top of my head, but pretty much one is heavy duty, one's light duty. Slightly different shape, but this one ended up being the heavy duty style. Don't ask me why. Okay. Now I got that line started and pretty much finger tight. I'm going to take and tighten these right up. I still got that Ford out there running. I just hear the cooling fan just kicked on. I'm going to take a walk out there in a little bit just to check on that. I'll look up the torque specs on this, guys, but let's get it nice and tight. Take and tighten on that brake line. There she be. Alright. Still running. Alright, I'm going to actually shut this down for now. I don't like leaving stuff running unsupervised sometimes, especially after a job this big. It's been running for over 2 hours now. I took it for a short ride as well, but I got the coolant reservoir a little over full. I'll have to take some out of there, but that's still nice and clean. So I think we're in good shape, guys. Alright. If you take notice on the new brake shoes, you got one that's shorter than the other. And if you took notice before we took it apart, your shorter brake shoe goes towards the front of the vehicle, the longer one goes in the back. Alright, first we'll take and install the emergency brake lever onto the brake shoe. As you can see, it has the spring washer that goes on first, so you can install that. You don't want to try not to get the brake shoes too contaminated with grease and whatnot. However, I'll take and spray it down with brake cleaner once we're done. Next, you got your C-clip. Just set it in place like so. Just like so. Now sometimes, if any of these components you find are worn, like the springs are rusted, or the C-clips are stretched out, sometimes you could tweak them a little bit so they snap on nice and tight like this one did. This one had a spring kit put into it previously. If you do find like springs are rusted out and whatnot, or stretched out, just take them by a spring kit. They're pretty cheap. In this case we're okay, so let's move on. Okay. Got these two little pieces that go into those rubbers. Sometimes it's a little hard getting them to go in. The rubbers usually hold them in place for the most part. So once you get them in there, you'll be in good shape. Okay, the next thing I usually do, just to hold everything in place, we'll take the automatic adjuster mechanism. You have this back cup. As you can see, this one pushes through here like so. Put it on your brake shoe. Put it through there like so. Take your pin, feed it through the back, line everything up. Take the brake shoe retaining spring. I'll use the dike so you can see what I'm doing here. And just turn it so it lines up with the opposing notches that they rest in. And that'll hold the brake shoe in place for you for the most part as we move forward. Before I forget about this little spring, I'll take and install that now. That goes behind there like so. Okay, and we'll just do the same thing with the inner shoe. Okay, next for up top, you got this metal retaining bracket, and we're going to install that as well. I like applying a little never cease to that. Instead of getting on my hands, I'll just, that's a little too much. Just a matter of preference, guys. Just makes it easier getting off next time. Plus, it's a movement point. You got this fancy little clip. If you remember correctly, it goes just like that. Around like so. Before I put the springs on, we don't want to forget about this piece. It's a cross bracket for the emergency brake mechanism. So we're going to take and we'll put that in place. Make sure your notches are lined up. There you go. Next, I'm going to take and install this upper retaining spring, because as you can see, it's trying to, this spring here is trying to push the brake shoe away. So it's the longer one of the two upper ones. And as you can see, it has this hook. This actually goes in behind and stays on the back side of the backing plate of the brake shoe. And you pull it up. So we'll take and hook it around. You can put this on with a pair of cutting pliers, a pair of dikes. However, if you have the right tool, this is where these really come in handy and help. As you can see, it has a hook on this side. And just like so. Same thing with this spring. Hooks in the back. I use a pair of side cutters on this one. Okay, so that's pretty much all the top back together. Next, we're going to want to install the lower adjuster, the automatic adjuster. This is another thing you want to pay special attention to. I already took it apart and cleaned it. But a lot of times you'll find that these are frozen on. And if they freeze, then it won't allow this adjuster to move. To screw in and out to keep your brakes adjusted properly. So take these apart if you have to. Hit it with a wire wheel. Clean out any buildup. Clean it down with brake cleaner. Same thing with this piece. As you can see, I already put never cease in it. But if you have to, hit it with a wire wheel, get it to spin nice and free. And I'll just use a little never cease on the. Sure, now it wants to come out in globs. Before I couldn't get any out of it. It's a little too much. But it's hard to get a real good shot, but as you can see, you got the automatic adjustment lever on this side. That's where this is going to go into place. As you can see, when it pushes down, it screws it out. Okay? So we're going to start with it screwed in. That way we get our new drums on it. However, how this works for the most part, I'll try to explain it. You got this lever that comes up. You're hooked on. You got your spring that's keeping it off. Comes up and it's hooked up to this pin. So when you press your brakes, the wheel cylinder is going to push its pistons out, which will push the brake shoes out against the drums. And every time it pushes this out, as this pushes out, as you can see, it pulls on this lever. And when this pulls on up here, it'll push down here. And it'll adjust your brakes out until they touch. The spring hooks into the back, like so. Hopefully I'm not getting in your way. Just like so. And you can see, you push it back, it'll tighten it up, but it'll keep it from coming loose. I don't want to adjust that too far until I get the new drum and try it on there and see how it fits. Okay, I got some grease and whatnot for my gloves on the brake shoes, so I'm just going to take and spray them down a little bit. Take and do the same thing with your new brake drum. Spray it down, wipe off that protective coating. I already did that. Take and wipe yourself some never-sees around that perimeter. Good, let's see how this fits. As you see, it fits way too loose, so we're going to take and adjust the brake shoes a little. Okay, since this one has a covers welded on, like little pieces welded on that back adjustment hole where you can usually put a spoon through to adjust this, instead of cutting them out and knocking them out, I'll just adjust this to the point to where the brake shoes are just touching the drum, and then I'll slide it on so you'll have some resistance of the brake shoes rubbing, and that means that that's usually where I like to adjust them to, and that's where this mechanism will take it to that point as well. Take it a little bit further. That's what I do, guys. I just go a little bit at a time. Okay, guys, I think I got it pretty close right there. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to take it any further. I'm going to take and loosen the bleeders up and let it gravity bleed for a few minutes until I get a nice steady stream. It won't be a steady stream, but it'll be a nice steady constant drip. And then you know you have solid fluid coming back. And then I'll close them. And then we'll pump the brakes a few times. Always make sure you got your drums on before pumping it, otherwise you'll pop your wheel cylinders apart. But however, I'll pump it a few times. That should center our brake shoes for us. And then we'll feel it and see how close we are. I'll leave the reservoir cap off for now. Then we'll come to the back. Okay, the bleeder is a 5/16 or an 8mm, I believe. Yeah. It's 8mm. Fits pretty well. So we'll take and put ourselves a catch pan underneath. As you see, it's pretty dry. However, if we wait, we'll eventually see some fluid start to gravity feed out. That's because the reservoir is higher than this point. In some cases, if it's taking too long, tighten your bleeders back up, go up front, put the cap back on the reservoir, and pump the brakes a few times till you have a nice pedal. And then come back here and break them loose, and then it won't take too long before you start seeing some fluid. So we're just going to let this drip for a little bit. We're probably pretty good. It really doesn't take long, guys. As you can see, we got a nice steady little drip coming out. Oh, there's a little air. So, still got some air in there. As you see, she's blowing bubbles. And that's the thing, you just want to let it go until you got a nice steady drip. So, we still got a little bit of time. I'll let this bleed for a little bit longer. Okay, I've been watching this one for a while. Seems to be pretty steady. I don't see any more air coming out. So we're going to take and tighten this one up, and then we're going to do the same thing to the other side and check our pedal. Once you get a nice steady drip, come back up front, make sure your reservoir is topped off. And we'll take and reinstall the cap. You got that rubber grommet. It pretty much takes up space as your fluid drops. And this is where you run into the problem when you go to do front brake pads. Since we did the rear service, I top both chambers up. When I go to compress that, it's going to overflow if I don't remove some fluid. However, don't forget to reinstall that cap, otherwise you're going to make a mess when you pump it. The upper portion of the brake pedal, when you initially step on it, is for the rear brakes, so you're going to feel it drop. So pump it steady, nice and slow. I already pumped this one. However, you should have a nice firm pedal. You shouldn't drop too far. Okay, another thing, guys, if you come back, say you let it sit for a little bit after you pump out the pedal, you step on it and it's spongy, it drops more than normal, That's an indication that you have air in the system still. So go around, bleed it again. If you don't have any luck with the gravity feed style bleeding, then I would take and have someone else pump the pedal for you. Keep all the bleeders tight, have them pump it a few times, hold it down. Then you would take and break a bleeder loose, the fluid will come out. You tighten it up, then they could release the brake pedal, pump it a few times, and repeat that process until all the air is out of the system. There's a few different methods to bleeding. You could take and put a hose on the bleeder and run it to the bottom. Say if you have a jug filled that high with brake fluid, take the hose and run it right down to the bottom of the brake fluid so it's submerged into the brake fluid. Then break your bleeder loose and go inside and pump the pedal. And what will happen is all the air will come out into that jug. But remember, you're submerged inside brake fluid, so when you release it, you're not sucking in air. That's another method. That works pretty well. But if you have any air leaking up around the bleeder, you can suck air in. So it's not a real fail-safe way of doing it. Okay, now that we pumped the pedal a few times, I just want to see how much drag we still have since that centered our pads for us. And as you can see, we're still touching the pads. So I'm going to leave it just like that. I feel that's a nice resistance on those pads. If you go too tight, it's going to smoke on you and you'll have a drag. So you just want a nice resistance. You don't want it too tight or too loose. So I'm going to take and reinstall the tire. Okay, now that that's all pulled in and we pump the brakes, everything's centered, you should hear a slight drag of the brake shoes touching the drum. As you can hear that. It shouldn't be too hard to turn. And it's just a nice slight drag. That means you're right on the money. I'm going to raise it up, take it off the jack stands, lower it down, and torque the wheel. Well, if you want to hang out for a little longer, you're more than welcome. I'm just going to throw some front pads on this. I know I'm not doing this 100% correctly. However, the rotors are fine. They're well within specs. The run out is true. There's no pulsation. He's getting pretty close to the indicators. So he said while it's here, just throw some new pads on it. So that's what we're going to do. What you need for these is a 3/8 Allen socket. And I already got these ones loose, but there's 2 pins. You take the 3/8 Allen, so just loosen them up. I'm just take and pull the pins right out. Anyway, as you can see, they're in pretty good shape, nice and free. Take and set this one up here. Now if you're going to replace a rotor, it's real simple. You don't even have to take off a bracket. You can just remove this. So right there's one of them rust chunks I was talking about, guys. If you get that stuff behind there, they'll throw everything out of balance. I'm going to take and clean that up. Anyhow, even though we're not replacing it, just want to make sure nothing broke loose and fell behind it. Like I say, we're just going to pop the old pads out. Give everything a real quick spray down. Let that evaporate for a little bit. I removed a little bit of brake fluid from the reservoir. Like you've seen before, I overfilled it. So I already sucked a little bit out. What I use is like a turkey baster. I think I demonstrated it in one of my videos. Now if you get one where you can't get it to compress, this one's going pretty good. However, what you'd have to do then is take and remove the caliper, bring it over to the bench. Where the brake line goes, I usually leave this clamp on so this piston don't go flying. If I take some compressed air, pop it into the back, the piston will pop out. Then you take and clean it up, get a rebuild kit for it, put a new seal in there, put it back together, and you're good to go. Save yourself a little money. I'm just going to take it all the way in, that way we have plenty of room for the new pads. While that's going, I'm going to take and shoot these pins. Now these bolts usually come out, but sometimes they're stubborn. But there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm just going to take and clean them up, let them evaporate a little bit. I still had some pretty good grease on it from last time, but I'll install some new. That should be enough. I think it's all the way in. I'm just going to take some braking caliper grease. This is a new jar. I ran out of the other stuff. I like to just wipe it on the piston. That way I don't have to guess on the pad where it goes. You don't need a lot. Just any contact point. Now, I had a lot of people asking about the silicone paste. That's fine too, guys. I'm not partial from one to the other. I have silicone paste as well. But I tend to like to stick to what works for me. Not that I ever had a problem with silicone paste. It's just that I never had a problem with braking caliper grease either, and it's made for this. So I just stick with it, you know. And plus it's relatively inexpensive, and I go through so much of it. Brake jobs are one of the most common inspection components. This goes in so there's like a little spot that sometimes hits. Putting way too much on there. That's one thing I hate about a new jar. I'll actually wipe some of that off. But another spot. You see that I had to go dip that again, didn't I? Right here, right here. You'll see these little bosses. All that rides in there. Just like so. This outer pad, I already wiped the grease on the outside, so you see it just goes in, clips into place. So you can lube up your pins real well. That's probably the most important part, making sure these pins slide nice. Your most common brake failure are caliper pins sticking. That's why it's important to use the proper grease. Silicone paste is fine, like I mentioned. Stuff that's made for it's definitely fine. You just don't want to use regular grease that attacks to rubber, because the rubbers will swell and then they'll bind up. So whatever it is has to be compatible with rubber and high temperatures. But right here's another contact surface, as you can see here and here. So I feel much better once this jar is a little lower. I'm putting way too much on her, guys. Yeah. Like I said, 3/8. I'm gonna move my pan. Nothing worse than dropping your socket into the pan. I forget the YouTuber that had a question on my last brake job, if this was similar to the Avenger I just did. I figured I had it here, so I throw this up for him. Show him this is actually easier. Especially if you're doing a simple pad replacement, or even a rotor replacement. Pads and rotors. I usually replace everything at once, but this guy's pretty good. And these rotors are in real good shape. Just his pads were starting to get down there. So instead of him bringing it back in a month or two, they're lifetime warranty, so he just has to pay for labor. Okay guys, repeat the same process on the other side. Throw the tire on it and torque them to specs once I let it down. Remember, always pump that pedal before driving it or pulling it out of the garage. Pretty straightforward task. But if you ever feel like you're not comfortable doing a job like this, it's a major safety item, just have a qualified person do it for you. You know, if you don't feel like taking a risk, don't. If you don't feel comfortable, you know. Because especially with stuff like this, guys, even though it's not that complicated, it's not only your life you put on the line, it's everybody else that's around you. So you want to make sure everything's good. Like I mentioned before in other videos, maybe I'll take and I'll grease these ball joints up, make sure they're nice and tight. Go over the rest of the front end while I have this tire off. You know, the brake lines look nice. So I think I actually did these ones a few years back for them. So the rest of the truck's in pretty good shape. I'm going to be putting a fuel filter, doing a training service, and a few other things before this one leaves. However, this is probably going to be it for today. Until next time, guys, stay tuned. Thanks for watching.